Hey guys, Paul here at Impulsive Culinarian. Welcome to part 2 of the Thanksgiving recipe video series. So in this video, we're going to add 2 more excellent recipes to your Thanksgiving recipe arsenal. Okay, these are delicious. We always look forward to having leftovers of these because they're really special. Usually make them once or twice a year. So the first one is a pear and walnut stuffing. It's not made inside a turkey, okay? So technically, they call this a dressing. Whether you call it dressing or stuffing, it's delicious. And you want to make lots of it so that you've got leftovers after the big event, okay? The second one that we're doing is a skillet Brussels sprouts. These are delicious, nicely charred, done in a cast iron skillet. Hard to keep these leftovers as well. Even people who don't like Brussels sprouts often get converted with this dish, okay? So here's the ingredients that you're going to need. All right, let's start with the pear and walnut stuffing. Lots of ingredients for this, so let's break it down into a few parts. First, the mushroom ingredients. You're going to need 2 tablespoons of oil, 2 pounds of mushrooms, or 4 of those little containers. I peel mine because I have a problem. I'm always peeling my mushrooms, but as long as they're minced up, I'll show you how to do that later. 1 teaspoon of kosher salt. Okay, so for the seasoned onions mixture, you're going to need 2 tablespoons of dairy-free margarine, 2 medium to large size yellow onions, finely chopped, 1 great big pear, peeled, cored, and chopped into a small dice, 2 celery stalks, small dice, 2 cloves of garlic, minced, a half a cup of walnut pieces, 1/4 cup of fresh parsley, chopped up finely, 1 tablespoon of fresh sage, also finely chopped, a half a tablespoon of fresh thyme, finely chopped, a teaspoon of kosher salt, and some freshly ground black pepper. Okay, so the last part, the bread mixture, you're going to need 6 cups of bread cubes, not toasted or anything, around 3/4 inch cube, 1 cup of vegetable broth, 1/4 cup of white wine, and a half a teaspoon of dairy-free margarine. Okay, so for the skillet Brussels sprouts, here's what you're going to need. 3 tablespoons of olive oil, 2 pounds of Brussels sprouts, nicely trimmed, take off those dark green leaves, 1/3 of a cup of white wine, 2 tablespoons of dairy-free margarine, the juice of 1 lemon, half a teaspoon of kosher salt, and some freshly ground black pepper to taste. Let's go cook this up right now. Welcome to part 2, guys. Very excited about these 2 recipes. Stuffing, it's such a comfort food, and lots of people look forward to it. The one that I'm making today, you can do with mushrooms, okay? Or you can do it with sausage. I like to do a vegetarian stuffing because the occasional vegan or vegetarian that comes into our home at Thanksgiving, they usually just automatically avoid the stuffing, thinking that there's chicken livers or kind of sausage in there. And what a beautiful experience to see the look on their face when they find out that they are allowed to have the stuffing. And it's delicious, okay? So this selfish little moment for me to look forward to. That's why I'm doing a vegetarian version in this recipe video. But you can switch out the mushrooms for sausage or chicken livers or whatever you like, okay? So because of that, what you want to do is start off with the mushrooms. This is going to be probably the most time-consuming part of this whole stuffing recipe because you want to get the moisture out of these, all right? So get yourself 4 packs of mushrooms, all right? And start cleaning them off. I peel them. You don't have to do that if you don't want to, but get these ready to go. You know, there is a plus to peeling your mushrooms. You can make some amazing mushroom broth. Just saying. So there's my 4 pounds of mushrooms, guys, put into nicely peeled caps and stems. So you don't have to peel them, but I just find that it's irresistible to peel them. And look at that. I sense a bonus recipe coming on. You don't have to make mushroom broth, but I'm going to do it. Can't let it go to waste. So for each pound of mushrooms that you peeled, I peeled 4, put in a cup of water. So that's going to be 4 cups of water with all of these peelings. Into a saucepan. Go. Only other ingredients I put in, guys, small handful of peppercorns and bay leaf for 2. Around a teaspoon of peppercorns. So I'm going to bring that to a boil, and once it's there, I'll bring it back down to low and let it simmer an hour, 2, while you're making other food. Simmer it covered. You don't want to lose the broth. Okay, back to the stuffing. So there we are, 4 pounds of peeled mushroom caps and stems. What we're going to want to do is blitz these in the food processor. So get yourself a large bowl to receive the chopped up mushroom pieces and do them in small batches. So there's the consistency you're looking for, guys. Just grind them up into tiny little pieces and get them into your large bowl. Ta-da! Let's have a look. There you go, guys. 4 pounds of mushrooms, cleaned up, peeled, of course, and ground up in the food processor. So getting the mushrooms into this stage is probably the most tedious part of the process. Now's when the cooking actually starts. So let's preheat the oven to 350 degrees now. Now, as far as the broth that you're going to use, if like us, you prepared a lot of vegetable broth in advance, we make a lot of homemade broth, so it's frozen. Now's a good time to put this in a small saucepan and let it simmer, get it warmed up in preparation for when you're going to add all of the ingredients of the stuffing together. Or you can use the mushroom broth like this that you're preparing from your peelings. The reason I'm using this broth, this is a delicious roasted vegetable homemade broth that I put together a couple of months ago. I love the contrast of flavors of the vegetable broth with the sauteed mushrooms. Mushroom broth and mushrooms, it's a little bit too mushroomy, okay? So that's why I'm going to use something different to contrast it. Although I have made this recipe with the mushroom broth in a pinch, okay? So it's up to you. So with the oven preheating, the broth warming up, what you want to do is get yourself the biggest non-stick frying pan that you've got, okay? Biggest because you want as much surface area as you can get to process these mushrooms. What you want to do with them is you want to sweat out the moisture from these mushrooms. So the more surface area on your pan you've got, the better, okay? So get this on just below maximum. Medium-high heat. Okay, so once your non-stick frying pan is nice and hot, get a couple of tablespoons of oil in there. Get the mushrooms in the hot skillet. Now sprinkle on top of the mushrooms 1 or 2 teaspoons of kosher salt. So while that's all going, let's chop some onions. It's time to get at the compost box. It's gonna get composty around here. Yeah, so just a few minutes in, maybe 2-3 minutes, and look at that, it's a mushroom soup. Okay, that's all right. That's exactly what you want. Nice and high heat, as high as you're comfortable putting it on with your non-stick skillet, and let that water boil off. Okay, so there's 2 of my onions and a nice little dice. Okay, I'm gonna set those aside and peel and chop up the pear. There you have it, 1 pear diced up, nice little tiny cubes, run the same as the onion, more or less, but I like these a bit bigger so I can actually see them in the stuffing when it's finished. Mushrooms are transforming. Let's have another look. So there's that telltale sound, the sizzle. The mushrooms giving up the last of their water. You want to stir those around, okay? And start to pay attention that when the water is all gone, you're going to convert now from sweating these off into starting to saute them. You actually want to brown them a little tiny bit. So after your 7 to 10 minutes of evaporating water is complete, you can keep the heat high and then just keep an eye on them for the next 5 or 6 minutes as they just begin to brown. Okay, set your pears and your onions aside. Start chopping celery. So depending on the size of the celery stalks, you want to add 2, maybe 3. To get the small batch, add an extra one. Oh, lovely. Okay, the mushrooms are officially starting to brown. Let's have a look at this. So if you can't tell by the sound, for sure you're going to know by the smell. The lovely nutty flavor coming off those mushrooms. You see how they're just starting to brown on the underside? Okay, so you don't want to do much more than that. You just want to stir these around and make sure that you get as much browning as possible for a minute or 2. Then take them off the heat, put them in a bowl, and set them aside. Okay, so once your mushrooms have browned just a little tiny bit, bring the heat down to medium. Put your mushrooms aside in a small bowl. Looks like hamburger. Smells amazing. Tastes awesome. Excellent ingredient for this stuff. So there's the celery chopped up into a nice little dice. Put those aside. Bring out the garlic. You know garlic. Sometimes they're big, sometimes they're small. So you be the judge. 2 or 3 cloves of garlic. Okay, a few cloves of garlic minced up. Set those aside. Now, while we're chopping up our herbs, let's get this non-stick skillet over medium heat and start sauteing the onions. So with your pan over medium heat, start off with 2 big heaping tablespoons of margarine. Next, pop in the onions and the celery. You go ahead and season it with a big pinch of salt and some freshly ground black pepper. Chop up some herbs. I'm very sad to report that our garden no longer has any more sage. We've used it all, so I had to buy some. But be sure to use fresh, guys. None of that dried stuff, okay? For stuffing, very important. Freshly plucked herbs, chop them up. Okay, so now my onions are just starting to get a little bit brown, caramelizing a bit. Perfect time to add the pears and the garlic. You only want to saute that for another minute or two after. Oh, that smells amazing. Wow. I love Thanksgiving. That smells amazing. So you'll know when it's ready. A minute or two, the garlic starts to get nice and fragrant. You don't want to burn anything or char it. So remove this from the heat, set it aside, and let it cool. So I've got some fresh parsley, always on hand, a little bowl on the side here, but you want to get yourself a 1/4 cup of freshly chopped parsley. Add that to the mix. Get yourself some walnuts. Doesn't take much. A 1/2 cup is more than enough to add just a little bit of a crunch to this recipe. I got the walnut halves, so I'm just crushing them up a little bit to get them to smaller pieces. So in keeping with the theme, guys, of making these dishes ready to serve 6 to 8 people, all right? The size of casserole that I'm going to be using for the stuffing, this is a 2-liter dish, but you can use 1.5 liters if you have something a little bit smaller. This is nice because it's square, it's an even size, okay? And the good thing about a wide, shallow dish is that it's going to brown really nicely in the oven. Hey, the last thing we need is some bread. So if any of you are interested in making your own gluten-free white bread, I highly encourage you to check out my recipe for that here. This is great. It does not taste gluten-free. The size, it's normal size bread, not that little stuff. I hate that. It irks me. And of course, the cost. You can't beat the cost, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off around 5 slices of 3/4 inch thick bread, all right? That's going to give me exactly, more or less, what I need, okay? There you go. 6 1/3 cups. Crumbs included. Okay, so there's my 6 cups of homemade gluten-free bread cubes, 3/4 inch dice. Delicious. Okay, so into the bread cubes go 1 cup of your nicely warmed up vegetable broth and a 1/4 cup of white wine. Wine that you would drink, guys. Okay, so get yourself a large spoon, guys, and mix these up until all of the liquid is absorbed by your gluten-free bread cubes. All right, so they're going to look a little mushy. Perfect. Now's the time to add the rest of the ingredients. Start with your mushrooms. Then add your onion mixture. It smells so good. Okay, add in the walnuts and your herbs. Okay, big spoon, toss it all together until it's thoroughly combined. Wow, smells amazing. Now, the bonus is, because there are no eggs in this stuffing, you can taste it, and you'd want to taste it so that you can correct the seasonings. That's where you want to hit it up with a shot of salt and pepper as needed. Okay, get a little dab of margarine and grease your dish. Then get your stuffing mixture into the greased baking dish. Try and avoid packing it down too much, guys. Leave the textured top all a little bit messy like that. It's going to brown beautifully. Can't wait to dig in when it's done. So get that in a 350-degree oven, center rack, for 1 hour. Clean up, aisle 2. Okay, so the stuffing. A little bit tedious, I know. That's why we only do it once or twice a year, but the end result is spectacular. Now we're going to move on to something comparatively much easier, okay? So we're going to do some Brussels sprouts. Depending on how bushy your Brussels sprouts are, you may be peeling off a lot more leaves from these than these little slender guys. I would just recommend that you start off with 2 pounds rough and then peel them off, okay? I'll show you what I mean by that. So, Brussels sprout, cut off the stem, and that's going to allow you to release those outer, sort of darker colored leaves. Don't take off too many, just until you get to a nice, tight, compact little mini cabbage, okay? Then you're going to take each of these and cut them in half. That's going to allow the cooking process to get into the middle of each Brussels sprout. They're all going to come out nice and tender, okay? Peel them up. There you go, Brussels sprouts peeled in half. If you've got some really big mammoth-sized Brussels sprouts, okay, you can chop them into quarters if you want to match the smaller guys. Me personally, I like the different sizes. I think it adds a nice rustic appeal. So chopping and peeling and all of that stuff, you can do these Brussels sprouts well in advance. Get that stress out of your cooking day. Put them in an airtight container until you're ready to go. Now this recipe, like I told you, serves 6 to 8, and I'm doing that in a 12-inch cast iron skillet. If you need to serve more, get a bigger skillet, okay? Highly recommend this method. It's certainly going to taste great when it's done, but you want it to be ready and served immediately. The total cooking time is around 20 minutes for the Brussels sprouts. So I'm just going to wait for my stuffing timer to expire a little bit, and I want to have these ready to go at the same time, okay? So see you in around 15 minutes. Okay, so I've got just under a half an hour left on the timer for my stuffing. So what I'm going to start doing now is get my cast iron skillet warmed up to medium-high heat. So once your cast iron skillet is nice and hot, get 2 to 3 tablespoons of oil in there. And carefully put in your Brussels sprouts. So you want to stir this occasionally while you're charring all the little edges of your Brussels sprouts for around 8 to 10 minutes. More coffee? Okay. 3 guesses what's going to be part of the dessert episode. I don't know. So just a couple of minutes in, the reason why you've got this on medium-high heat is to get that charring. That's exactly what you want. You don't want to burn these, of course, so that's why you got to keep stirring this. And if you find that it's charring too quickly, you can simply turn down your heat just a little tiny bit. So you're going to get to a point at around the 7 or 8 minute mark where it's no matter how much you stir, they're about to start burning. So that's when you want to stop. Add your 1/3 cup of white wine and reduce the heat down to medium low. Cover it up. So now you're going to let these beautifully charred Brussels sprouts simmer in the white wine for a good 2 to 5 minutes. You want to test them just to make sure when they're cooked. So once 2 or 3 minutes has gone by, get a fork and try one of the larger ones for doneness. Make sure that it's nice and tender. Another couple minutes. Now you don't want to overcook them at this stage. When it's on a nice low simmer like this, they're still cooking because they're fresh off the high heat. But you know, Thanksgiving, Christmas, it's inevitable. You got 17 things going at once. There's people all over the place. So you know what? If you really have no choice but to let this sit for a while, you want to remove it from the heat when they're almost cooked. That way, they're not going to be mushy when you put them on the table. We know how it can be. I'll confess that the lid that I'm using for my cast iron pan doesn't sit very well on top. It's got little leaks everywhere. So my white wine has evaporated. I'm going to add another shot of white wine to let it continue steaming for the last 2 or 3 minutes. Okay, so when the Brussels sprouts are almost cooked, now's the time to add the juice of 1 lemon and a couple of great big tablespoons of dairy-free margarine. And of course, you also want to season it now, because you haven't seasoned it yet, with a 1/2 teaspoon of kosher salt and some freshly ground black pepper. Oh man, this smells so good. Now I know there are some people that don't like Brussels sprouts. You may just convert them with this dish. The beautiful browning and charring there adds a little bit of nuttiness, almost a sweetness to these Brussels sprouts. And the beautiful liquid down there. Lemon juice, white wine, seasoned with some salt and pepper. This tastes great, guys. So you do want to serve this as soon as possible once it's done. If it has to wait 5-10 minutes, not the end of the world. But try and time this with the end of your cooking process. Okay, 1 hour is ready. Get that stuffing out of the oven. Oh, the smell! Oh, come on. Part 2 is a success. Look at that. Some beautiful pear and walnut stuffing and some skillet braised Brussels sprouts. Fantastic. The smells in here are amazing, guys. Totally smells like the holidays. There's some gorgeous pear and walnut stuffing. Look at that color. Oh, and the herbs and the celery. Just the right amount of green. I can't wait to dig into this. It's not a bad idea to let that cool just a little bit, but you can serve it right out of the oven, no problem. That'll go quickly. And then the Brussels sprouts, once they've stirred up and the margarine is melted and they're still just sizzling a little tiny bit, simmering rather, that's a fantastic addition. Guys, part 2, success. There you go. 2 more recipes for your arsenal. So there you go, guys. That's a wrap on part 2 of the Thanksgiving recipe video series. I can't wait to show you next week, guys. We're going to start to get into main dishes, all right? Some turkey breast, and I might have a little surprise for you. Some make-ahead gravy. I'm going to experiment this week, and I look forward to the next video that I can show you next Saturday. Of course, stay tuned Wednesday nights. We go live here on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to give you a little bit of an update. And I get to open up some wine. I got another bottle. That's in my top 5. I'm so excited. So join me live right here on YouTube, on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, wherever you like to hang out. And I'll be there with you having a drink on Wednesday night. My name is Paul from Impulsive Culinarian. Thanks so much for watching, guys. And be sure to subscribe to the channel. Subscribe. Do it now. Hit the button. Brussels sprouts. Oh, come on. Browning. Gorgeous. Fresh herbs.